Ever wonder what it was really like to live in a medieval castle? Not the Hollywood fantasy version with candlelit banquets and dashing knights who somehow never poop. I mean actual castle life. Stone walls, cold beds, drafty halls filled with distant relatives and diseases that sound like failed potions. You think you want to be royalty? Buddy, you don't even want to visit this place. Tonight, we're not looking at castles through rose-tinted stained glass. We're cracking open the front gate, walking past the confused livestock, stepping over a suspicious puddle, and settling in for the real deal. Nobility in the Middle Ages. You've got money, titles, and a really big key to a door that mostly stays broken. Congratulations, you're living in luxury. Medieval luxury. Which is to say it still smells like soup and mildew. We will explore what castle life was actually like for the elite. Spoiler, it's less Game of Thrones and more who peed in the stairwell again. So, grab your scratchiest wool blanket, make peace with the rats, and settle in. Because your new home is made of stone, filled with secrets, and just slightly warmer than a coffin. And hey, if you enjoy learning boring history in ridiculous detail while you drift off to sleep, hit that subscribe button. Or don't. It's the Middle Ages. We're all dying of something anyway. So, you've woken up as a noble in a medieval castle. Congratulations. You did it. You climbed the feudal ladder without stepping in a single peasant rebellion. Your family name has land attached to it. Your closet contains at least one ceremonial hat, and you're legally allowed to use a coat of arms with a lion, a sword, or, if you're particularly edgy, a goose with attitude. There's just one tiny problem. Your life still sucks. Only now, it's happening inside larger, colder rooms. Let's start with what you think a castle is. You're probably imagining towering stone walls glinting in the sunlight, romantic balconies draped in ivy, maybe a great hall with roaring fires, and a long wooden table where wine is poured freely, and someone sings in the background. That's adorable. That's also a lie. You've been fed a steady diet of fantasy novels and overpriced Netflix dramas. And now it's time for a reality check, so cold it could freeze the mould on your chamber pot. A real medieval castle isn't cosy. It's not whimsical. It's a fortress with chronic dampness, designed by people who considered windows suspicious and comfort a moral weakness. Everything inside is made of stone, including your seat, your bed frame, your bath, once a month if you're wild, and your future if you stay here long enough. The whole place feels like someone tried to build a prison, then halfway through thought, let's add a throne. It's built for war, not wellness. That beautiful archway, perfect for pouring boiling oil on strangers. That spiral staircase, strategically curved so right-handed invaders have to stab with their left hand while tripping over your aunt. Every architectural choice was made by a paranoid warlord with a thing for symmetry and scalding liquids. And speaking of cold, let's talk about the temperature. It is, in a word, permanent. Always cold. Summer, still cold. Fall, also cold, but now with decorative leaves stuck in the tapestries. Winter? Congratulations. You're officially part of the ice sculpture collection. You'd think all the furs, fireplaces and heavy drapes would help, and they do, for about 5 minutes. Then the wind finds the hole in the wall, where a decorative arrow slit lets in just enough air to ruin your mood, extinguish your candle, and remind you that insulation is a sin. And yet, here you are, nobility, a member of the 1%, in a world where 99% of people are busy farming mud and praying not to be conscripted. You've got status, you've got land, you've got a crest embroidered on your doublet, but don't get too smug. You also have gout, lice, and a cousin named Oswald who never leaves and keeps borrowing your ceremonial leggings. Your mornings begin with a trumpet or a knock on the heavy wooden door, followed by a servant mumbling something about breakfast or guests, or a sheep crisis in the lower pasture. The air is so cold your breath fogs, your bones ache, and your toes have developed a personality of their own. You reach for your fur-lined robe, only to find that someone else is already wearing it. That someone is your spouse, and they're not giving it back. As a noble, your bedroom is massive. It's also empty, because furniture is expensive, and moving a chair across a cobbled courtyard requires 6 peasants and a written plan. So you've got a bed, a trunk, a small table, with a goblet that may or may not be growing something, and a single candle bravely fighting for relevance. The walls are stone, the floor is stone, the air is 80% draft. You've slept in barns warmer than this, but those barns didn't have hand-woven tapestries depicting your family murdering a boar. Outside your room, the castle groans with life. Not the joyful, bustling life of a magical kingdom, the other kind. Echoing footsteps, muttered curses from servants carrying slop buckets, the sound of chamber pots being emptied into the inner courtyard, which you now realise was not built for aesthetic reasons. It smells like wood smoke, wet dogs, unwashed velvet, and something unsettlingly medieval you can't quite place. You're too rich to ask questions and too hungry to care. Now let's talk about your role here. You're not working the fields or shoeing horses, but you do have responsibilities. You have to oversee estate management, which is a fancy way of saying, make sure Oswald doesn't accidentally set fire to the barley stores again. You sit in judgment over local disputes, like who stole whose goat, or whether Agatha's bread cart is cursed. You occasionally throw feasts, which involve planning, alliances, and the emotional stamina of a hostage negotiator. And once a year, you might have to ride into battle, but only if your lord insists, and you've sobered up enough to find your sword. Oh, and you're constantly entertaining guests. Nobles love to visit each other to show off their cloaks and pretend to care about the falcon breeding season. Every visit means preparation. Tapestries cleaned, candles lit, trunks aired out, swans aggressively rearranged in the moat. It's exhausting. You never get to relax because there's always a minor baron hovering in your solar, trying to marry off his daughter or borrow your best goblets. And don't be fooled by titles. Just because you're a count or a lady doesn't mean you're living large. Rank is a ladder, and everyone's climbing it with a knife in one hand and a genealogy scroll in the other. You're constantly watching your back. That's not paranoia, that's etiquette. Even your free time isn't really free. You're expected to engage in noble pastimes, embroidery, chess, hawking, reading poorly translated philosophy, or composing poetry that rhymes doom with gloom because your Latin tutor gave up on you after week 3. And yes, you have to look good while doing it, because nobles are judged by their posture, their diction, and whether or not their stockings match. At night, the castle quiets down. Sort of. The wind howls through the battlements, dogs bark in the yard, and someone is always walking around with a candle at 3 a.m, like they're haunted or trying to be. You lie in bed, surrounded by velvet curtains you can't close properly, staring at the ceiling beams and wondering if that creaking sound is the roof, or a very determined bat. This is your life now, highborn, cold, constantly itchy, with just enough bread, power, and embroidery to keep you from running off into the forest and living as a stylish outlaw. People envy you. They shouldn't. Because while peasants break their backs in the fields, at least they don't have to make small talk with Oswald. Welcome to your castle. It's your fortress, your home, your social prison, and your worst Airbnb. And you're going to love it, because everyone else has to pretend they do, and appearances are the only thing colder than these walls. Let's get something straight right now. Castles were not designed for comfort. They were designed for defense, intimidation, and maximum misery per square foot. You might think being a noble means you live in an architectural marvel. Technically, yes. Emotionally, spiritually, hygienically? Absolutely not. Your castle is a stone tribute to draftiness and poor decisions. From the outside, it looks impressive. Thick walls, tall towers, a dramatic drawbridge that only creaks when important people cross it. But once you're inside, the spell breaks. The first thing that hits you is the cold. The second is the smell. The third is a stair you didn't see because the torchlight doesn't reach that far. Welcome to your home. It's beautiful. If your benchmark for beauty is a particularly moody cave. The walls are made of thick, grey stone, majestic, imposing, and excellent at absorbing cold and broadcasting every cough, fart, and regret through the entire building. The ceiling beams loom above you like judgmental ribs. Tapestries try their best to pretend this is a warm and cultured environment, but they're basically medieval wallpaper with delusions of grandeur. You can't touch the walls without wondering if you're about to disturb a family of spiders older than your bloodline. Every room is an echo chamber. Drop a spoon in the solar, and someone in the tower 3 floors up will think the sky is falling. Try whispering. It doesn't matter. This castle has the acoustic sensitivity of a cathedral and the gossip retention of a tavern. Privacy is not a concept here. It's a rumour, and a dangerous one at that. Bedrooms. Giant empty boxes that double as meat lockers. Kitchens. Windowless stone caves where people scream over boiling cauldrons. And the halls? Oh, the halls. Endless grey corridors with uneven floors, flickering torches, and the vague sensation that someone in a cloak is always watching you from the shadows. They probably are, or it's a tapestry with eyes. Either way, unsettling. Now let's talk about stairs. You will come to know them. You will come to fear them. Castle staircases are medieval engineering's version of a hazing ritual. They spiral tightly upward, always clockwise. Why? So defenders coming down have the advantage. Great if you're being attacked. Horrible if you're late for dinner and wearing 40 pounds of brocade. The steps are narrow, uneven, and every third one seems personally offended by your existence. There's no handrail. Of course there's no handrail. Your support system is God and momentum. Descending them in the dark with a candle is a sport. An Olympic-level, ankle-breaking, knee-shattering sport. You slip once, and congratulations, you've just become a part of the great nobleman stair-related injury statistic, one of the leading causes of shameful limping and spontaneous swearing in the 13th century. But maybe you make it down. Maybe you've survived the treacherous twists of the tower stairs. Now what? Well, now you get to explore the lower levels. Drafty courtyards, uneven stone courtyards, and cellars that smell like betrayal and turnips. Everything is damp. Everything. There isn't a single dry surface in this entire fortress. The walls weep. The floors sweat. The ceiling drops condensation directly into your goblet like nature's unwanted seasoning. If you're lucky, you have wooden flooring in some rooms. If you're really lucky, it hasn't rotted yet. Most of the time, your floor is stone, and you learn quickly that stepping barefoot on medieval stone in winter is a one-way ticket to understanding frostbite on a spiritual level. Oh, and insulation. Sweet summer child. What's that? There is no insulation. That's not even a concept yet. The closest thing you have is animal fur, and unless you plan to glue a bear to your wall, you're stuck with layers of damp air, wool cloaks, and prayer. You can sit directly in front of a roaring fire and still see your breath. And the fireplace? Massive, sure, but it's more decorative than effective, like a noble who owns land but can't read. Speaking of fires, let's not forget the smoke. Chimneys are a luxury feature, and they don't always work. Most of the time, the smoke just swirls around like a confused ghost before reluctantly drifting upward. Your great hall smells like burnt mutton and ambition, and your eyes haven't stopped watering since Tuesday. And yet, even with all this architectural hostility, there are still nobles who brag about their solar. That's the fancy name for the private family room on the upper floors, where you allegedly relax. It's meant to be warm and cosy. Instead, it's slightly less miserable than every other room. It's the medieval version of luxury, less awful than the dungeon. Now, let's discuss the bathrooms. Or, as they were known, garderobes, which is French for "you'll regret this." The garderobe is a little stone nook that juts out from the side of the castle wall, basically a medieval poop chute. There's a wooden bench with a hole in it, and beneath that, a very long drop, and beneath that, a moat, or the courtyard, or a terrifying pile of accumulated human decisions. The idea was simple. Gravity handles your business, nature takes care of the rest, and no one ever speaks of it again. Privacy? Please. There's no door. Maybe a curtain if you're lucky. And those curtains? Not soundproof, not smell-proof, not dignity-proof. Sometimes the waste chute leads into the moat, which is fine if you're defending the castle. Less fine if you're the one cleaning the fish. Oh, and in winter, that draft you feel on your cheeks? That's not the breeze of freedom. That's wind whistling up from the frozen poop canyon you just used. It's humbling. It's humiliating. It's medieval hygiene. And it's still better than a chamber pot. Chamber pots, those elegant little basins of sorrow, are your nighttime option. You keep one in your room for emergencies, which in this climate is every night. Once full, the contents are dumped out the window or carried down to a designated spot, usually by someone very unlucky and underpaid. Every castle has that one unfortunate soul whose job title might as well be Lord of the Ladles. Now here's a fun fact. Castles were deliberately built to be inconvenient. Hallways were narrow to slow invaders. Stairs were twisty to disadvantage sword arms. Towers were isolated to create defensible positions, which means, if you need to carry a plate of hot stew from the kitchen to the dining hall 3 floors up, you better believe it's a test of agility, stamina, and balance. Bonus points if you don't step in something questionable on the way. The castle at night is a different beast. Cold becomes a personality trait. The halls moan. The wind screeches through gaps in the walls. Floorboards creak despite being stone, because ghosts don't follow the laws of physics. You walk with a candle, and the fragile hope that you won't trip on your robe, your dog, or your existential dread. So yes, you live in a castle, but don't get it twisted. You're not floating through golden halls and dining under chandeliers. You're navigating a stone labyrinth designed to keep people out, and, in the process, keep you in. This isn't luxury, it's just slightly better incarceration. With furniture, but hey, it's your home. Your glorious, freezing, echoing, poop-scented fortress. You wouldn't trade it for the world. Unless someone offered you central heating, or functioning plumbing, or just a chair that doesn't give you splinters. Now, if you've recovered from this architectural roast, it's time to move on to something just as dismal, your bedroom. Spoiler alert, it's haunted by your own regrets and smells like goat. So here you are, dear noble, retreating to your private chamber after a long day of judging peasants, pretending to understand Latin, and almost slipping on a roast goose in the great hall. You're exhausted. All you want is a warm, soft bed in your own quiet space. Too bad. Because in a medieval castle, the concept of a private bedroom is as fictional as dragons with good dental hygiene. What you've actually got is a very cold, very large echo chamber with a bed that looks like it came with a complimentary tetanus diagnosis. Let's start with the walls. Still stone. Always stone. The kind of walls that hold on to cold like a bitter X. They never warm up. Ever. In winter, you could slap a turkey on the floor and it would be preserved until spring. In summer, the room stays just chilly enough to ensure you never fully dry off from your bath 2 days ago, which was already a traumatic event. And now, the bed. Let's call it what it is. A large wooden frame of mild suffering. Ornate? Yes. Elegant? Possibly. Comfortable? Never. It's built tall, comically tall, because someone long ago decided that nobility should sleep closer to the ceiling than the common man. This means climbing into it requires either a stool, a small ladder, or just enough desperation to perform a graceless leap and hope you don't pull something essential. The frame creaks ominously, like it remembers better times when the person sleeping on it hadn't just eaten 6 trenchers of gravy-soaked meat. The mattress? That's a generous word. It's a sack stuffed with straw, hair, moss, and the occasional regret. Lumpy in some places, flat in others, it offers all the orthopedic support of a damp sack of turnips. It smells faintly of mildew, sheep, and betrayal, because it hasn't been cleaned since your grandfather passed away on it. Peacefully, but still enough to stain. Now for the real stars of the show: fleas, lice, and bedbugs. Congratulations. You're not alone. These are your nightly companions. They live rent-free in your sheets, your mattress, your hair, and your legacy. You can't kill them. You can't escape them. You can only make peace with the constant itching and the quiet knowledge that everyone else is suffering too, so at least it's egalitarian. Bedding includes a pillow, the size and consistency of a half-cooked ham, and a heavy wool blanket that feels like someone stitched together every sweater in the village and then soaked it in sadness. It's never been washed. Not once. If it touches your skin, you'll learn what fermented body oil feels like. On the bright side, it does keep you warm, mostly because it weighs 40 pounds and pins you to the bed like a particularly judgmental ghost. And yes, there are curtains around the bed. Beautiful ones. Velvet or brocade, depending on how flashy you're feeling. But don't get excited. These aren't for warmth or privacy. They're for status. They say, I am important enough to have decorative cloth near my face. They also trap heat, smell, and the occasional cousin trying to hide from his gambling debts. Now the room itself, huge, echoey, and about as intimate as a barn during a festival. You may be a noble, but so is your extended family, and they all insist on being nearby. Why? Tradition, which means you're probably sharing this private space with your spouse, a couple of younger siblings, a sickly uncle, and someone named Millicent, who nobody remembers inviting, but is still here 6 months later. Even when you're alone, you're not alone. Servants are always drifting in and out to stoke the fire, fetch water, rearrange your chamber pot, or just stand awkwardly in the corner pretending not to hear you, arguing about whose turn it is to scrape the fleas off the bed curtains. Sometimes there's a guard stationed just outside your door, which might sound comforting until you realise he's also listening to everything, including your digestion. And the noise, oh the noise. Stone echoes, loudly. You can hear footsteps on the other end of the hall. You can hear someone sneeze 3 floors above you. You can hear rats playing tiny concerts between the rafters. And worst of all, you can hear your uncle snore. Not just any snore. A full-throated, paint-peeling, soul-vibrating nasal symphony that could wake the dead if they weren't already avoiding your bedroom out of respect. The windows don't help. They're tiny slits, designed more for arrows than sunlight. If you open them, congratulations, you've just invited in the wind, the rain, and a dozen bored pigeons. If you close them, the room turns into a cave. Not the cool kind. The damp, musty kind that medieval poets describe as where the heart goes to rot. Lighting is provided by candles. Lots of them. Because nothing says sleep well like flickering flames near flammable drapery. If you're fancy, you have a wrought iron chandelier with beeswax candles dripping onto your bedding like waxy judgment. But most nights, you make do with one candle near the bed and the knowledge that shadows are probably harmless. Probably. Storage? You have a wooden chest at the foot of your bed. It holds clothes, letters, heirlooms, and, if you're lucky, a flask of something strong enough to erase your memory of the day's events. Your clothes hang on wooden pegs along the wall, right next to a tapestry depicting your ancestor heroically stabbing a boar that may or may not have been a family dog. Every object in your room is either made of wood, leather, or sorrow. And just when you think you can settle in and sleep, the bells ring. The church bells. Because medieval timekeeping is based on making sure no one ever truly relaxes. Bells for matins, bells for vespers, bells for morning prayers, for midnight masses, for festivals, for funerals. You are never more than 6 hours away from being gently, then aggressively, reminded of God. So you lie there, in your grand stone bedroom, under your heavy, itchy blanket, surrounded by breathing family members, biting insects, flickering candlelight, and the faint sound of someone retching in a chamber across the hall. You stare at the ceiling beams, count the spiderwebs, and ponder how being rich still somehow led you here, itchy, exhausted, and emotionally compromised by your own mattress. But don't worry, morning will come. Eventually. And with it, more responsibilities, more layers of uncomfortable clothing, and another long, cold walk to the great hall for breakfast, which will almost certainly be a bowl of sadness. Sleep tight. If you thought being noble meant waking up to silk robes and golden slippers, let me stop you right there. You don't roll out of bed like a Disney princess. You climb out of a straw-stuffed flea buffet, step onto an ice-cold stone floor, and prepare to wrap yourself in more fabric than a theatre curtain caught in a windstorm. Welcome to the noble wardrobe, a dazzling display of wool, fur, lace, and lies. Your outfits say, wealth, to anyone who sees you from a distance. Up close they say, please don't ask when I last washed this. Because spoiler, you didn't. Let's begin with what you wear under it all, assuming you wear anything under it all. Underwear in the Middle Ages was optional. And by optional, I mean often non-existent. If you were particularly modest or trying to impress the priest, maybe you'd slip on a linen undertunic, also called a chemise. But most days, you're going commando beneath 3 layers of unwashed nobility, praying your inner thighs don't start a civil war of their own. Layer 1. Your linen base. The only breathable thing you'll wear all day, and the only thing anyone expects you to occasionally wash. Once a month, if you're feeling decadent. Twice, if you're trying to win favour with your confessor. Layer 2. Your actual outfit. And calling it one outfit is generous. It's more like a complicated textile origami project that requires a team of servants, a mild stretch routine, and the patience of a saint. For men, it's a tunic, usually made of thick wool, belted at the waist, and designed to trap heat, sweat, and poor decisions. For women, it's a gown, also wool, also thick, with sleeves long enough to double as tablecloths and skirts so wide you could hide a minor bishop in the folds. Then come the outer garments, capes, cloaks, mantles, hoods, all made of increasingly impractical fabrics that scream status and whisper infection. The more layers you wear, the more important you are, or at least that's what everyone pretends. Really, it just means your armpits are now mini ecosystems, and the person behind you in church is silently begging for mercy. Now, let's talk colours, because in the Middle Ages, colour equals class. Rich reds, royal blues, vibrant purples, all made with expensive dyes, all intended to make peasants weep with envy. The downside? Many of these dyes are made from crushed insects, fermented snails, or substances so toxic they make your skin glow, not in the good way, in the am I supposed to be this itchy way. Jewellery? Absolutely. You adorn yourself with rings, brooches, and necklaces so gaudy they might qualify as assault weapons. Chains of office, signet rings, jewelled belts. Each piece serves one purpose: to scream, "I'm important," so loudly that the lice flinch. You don't just wear status, you clank with it. But dressing isn't quick. Oh no. Getting fully dressed as a noble is a process that takes time, coordination, and an entire supporting cast. You don't just throw on clothes. You step into them like a reluctant actor in a play written by a committee of tailors and medieval chiropractors. Servants fetch your garments, heat them by the fire if it's winter, which it always is, help you into your many layers, and lace you into garments so tight they could double as armour. Corsets, bodices, sleeves that require threading, belts with buckles so tiny They must have been invented by a sadist with a needle fetish. And all of it held together by pins. So many pins. You are, essentially, a walking pincushion in wool. And footwear? Oh, sweet summer noble. Your shoes are made of soft leather, thin soles, and zero support. They're less footwear and more suggestions. Slippers. If you're indoors, pointy-toed leather boots if you're trying to impress someone. These shoes were not made for walking. They were made for hobbling across stone floors while muttering about your bunions. Let's address the elephant in the Great Hall. Laundry, or rather, the shocking absence of it. Washing clothes in the Middle Ages was not a weekly event. It was a biannual pilgrimage of suffering. Water had to be hauled, boiled, poured into tubs. Soap was homemade, caustic, and smelled like betrayal. Drying took days. So instead of washing clothes, you just wore them again. And again. Until they either fell apart or absorbed enough odour to become legally sentient. To cover the smell, you carried pomanders, tiny scent balls filled with herbs and spices, lavender, cloves, rosemary. Essentially, you're trying to perfume a corpse without admitting it's dead. For extra flair, some nobles sew fragrant sachets into their sleeves or hang dried flowers from their belts. It doesn't help. You still smell like warm wool and foot. Deodorant? No, not even conceptually. You sweat. Everyone sweats. The castle is a funk festival and you're headlining. Perfume exists, but it's wildly expensive and typically reserved for special occasions like weddings, royal banquets, or covering up your involvement in a mysterious poisoning. And hair. Oh, your glorious noble hair. For men, the style is simple. Long, greasy, vaguely knight-like. For women, it's complicated. Braided, pinned, wrapped, covered with a linen coif, and finally topped with a hat so bizarre it deserves its own biblical warning. Hennins, wimples, veils. Some look like inverted cones. Others resemble satellite dishes. They're not practical. They're just visible evidence that you don't do manual labour. Headwear isn't just fashion, it's moral obligation. Exposing your hair in public as a noblewoman is scandalous. Unless you're married, or about to be, or trying to scandalise the bishop. In which case, let it fly, you rebel. Facial hair for men is a statement. You either have a noble beard that says, I own land and have opinions, or you're clean-shaven, which says, I probably bathe too often and am up to something. Trimming is done with a knife, a prayer, and the shaky hands of a valet who hopes you don't flinch mid-swipe. Now hygiene, if we can call it that. Bathing is rare, as in maybe a few times a year. Nobles might have access to a bathhouse or their own private wooden tub, but getting the water boiled, hauled, poured, and not immediately frozen again is such a production that most opt for the dry rub. Linen cloth, scented water, and denial. You might wash your hands and face daily. Anything beyond that is spiritual overkill. Teeth, yellow. Breath, weaponized. Mouthwash, some swish wine, some chew herbs. Others just don't open their mouth unless necessary. There is no floss. Toothbrushes are twigs. Dental care is whatever the local priest says won't anger God. In summary, dressing like a noble is a full-body performance. You look incredible, from a distance. Up close you're hot, itchy, smelly, and one gust of wind away from accidentally flashing the kitchen staff. But it's worth it, because appearances matter more than comfort, and if there's one thing nobility knows how to do, it's suffer beautifully. So now that you're laced, pinned, perfumed, and ready to overheat dramatically while walking across the Great Hall, let's talk about food, because after all that effort, you deserve a meal. Just don't expect it to taste like anything other than boiled ambition. So, you've made it through another grueling day of castle-based nonsense, inspecting the grain stores, ignoring your spouse, avoiding Oswald, and now it's finally time for dinner. Or, as it's known among the nobility, the daily test of digestive endurance. Eating in the Middle Ages is not just about nourishment. It's not even really about food. It's about status, spectacle, and surviving long enough to finish your pigeon pie before the entertainment starts jousting indoors again. The Great Hall is your stage. Long wooden tables stretch out like a runway made of splinters. Banners hang from the rafters. The fireplace roars dramatically. Everything smells like roasted meat and damp wood, which is either festive or foreboding depending on your proximity to the dogs lurking under the benches. You don't sit alone. Nobles eat in communal fashion, because nothing bonds a room faster than a shared fear of foodborne illness. You're seated by rank, high-born lords and ladies at the high table on a raised platform. Everyone else arranges themselves in descending order of importance and proximity to the fire. If you're near the door, congratulations, you're basically a dignified doormat. Now let's talk place settings. There are no forks. Forks are either unheard of or regarded with deep suspicion, like sorcery or the French. Instead, you've got a knife, a wooden spoon, and a pair of clean hands you hope stay that way. If you're especially fancy, you have a napkin, but it's not around your neck. It's draped over your shoulder, like you're about to dramatically insult someone's bread. Plates? Also a lie. Most food is served on trenchers, which are thick slices of stale bread that double as dishware and edible sponge. Everything, stew, sauce, mystery juice, gets dumped onto this crusty foundation. At the end of the meal, the trenchers are either eaten, if you're feeling reckless, given to the poor, if you're feeling generous, or thrown to the dogs, if you're feeling theatrical. Now for the food. Ah, yes, the feast. That glorious medieval meal that lives in the imagination as an endless buffet of golden roasted animals and luscious pies. And yes, there's some of that. But there's also a lot of confusion, repetition, and things stuffed inside other things, because no one has invented Tupperware. Meat is the centerpiece. Always meat. Boar, venison, pheasant, swan, rabbit, even hedgehog, if you're particularly angry that day. These creatures are roasted whole, served with heads intact, and occasionally dyed fun colours, because the medieval palate was driven entirely by boredom and dares. If it doesn't sparkle or bleed, why bother? You may be served pottage, which is a chunky stew made from whatever didn't escape the kitchen this morning. Beans, barley, onions, root vegetables, a suspicious sausage, and a hint of last week's regrets. It's ladled directly onto your trencher, with all the grace of a peasant flinging mud at a cart. It's filling. It's hot. It has texture. That's the nicest thing we can say about it. And let's not forget pies. Medieval nobles love pies. Not sweet ones, not the good kind. These are meat pies, fish pies, eel pies, bird pies with the legs sticking out like they're trying to escape mid-bake. Everything goes in a pie. Pies are your fridge, your oven, and your trash bin, all in one flaky package. Don't ask what's inside. Just chew and make peace with your gods. Vegetables? Technically, yes, but only the kinds that grow underground and don't make you look poor. Turnips, onions, leeks. Maybe cabbage if it's a holiday. They're boiled to the consistency of despair and served with a vague apology. Greens are rare because they're peasant food, and if you eat something leafy, someone might accuse you of trying to heal. Fruit exists, but not the fresh, happy kind. Apples and pears, usually baked or stewed into mush. Grapes if you're lucky. Raisins if you're not. Citrus is practically mythical, only seen in paintings or in the hands of very rich merchants trying to start a conversation about their recent trip to Spain. What about seasoning? Salt is king. It's locked in a box and measured like diamonds. Pepper is rare and expensive. Cinnamon, nutmeg, saffron, only for the elite. So yes, you can season your meat. Just know that doing so casually in front of your guests is the culinary equivalent of rolling around in gold coins. Now for drinks. Everyone drinks wine or ale, and I mean everyone. Children, monks, that weird uncle in the corner who swears by goat's milk but still downs 3 mugs of spiced claret before noon. Water is off the table. Literally. Because water is filled with parasites and bacteria, and more regret than the wine barrel ever held. Wine is preferred, but it's usually diluted with water and flavoured with honey, herbs, or cinnamon to mask the fact that it was probably shipped in a barrel that also previously held fish. If you're in northern regions, you're drinking ale. Weak, flat, and sometimes warm enough to make you question your choices. But hey, it won't kill you, immediately. What it will do is slowly destroy your liver, your teeth, and your ability to recognise scurvy. Because let's be honest, you haven't seen a fresh orange in 10 years, and your gums are starting to look like boiled beetroot. Vitamin C is a concept the future can deal with. Right now, you're on your 3rd goblet of mystery wine, and halfway through a goose leg that's pink in all the wrong places. But don't worry, there's entertainment. Minstrels, jugglers, and troubadours wander between tables singing about heroes you've never heard of, and occasionally rhyming chivalry with mystery meat. If you're lucky, a jester will show up. If you're unlucky, he'll try to involve you in a skit, and you'll be forced to mime sword-fighting your brother-in-law, while everyone else laughs and pretends the eel pie isn't fighting back. Dessert is rare. Sugar is expensive and mostly imported, so only the richest nobles enjoy sweetened confections. Honey cakes, candied nuts, spiced wafers. Most nobles end their meals with cheese, dried fruit, or more meat. Because nothing says meal complete, like an extra slab of salted pork with a pickled plum perched on top, like a nervous garnish. Once the feast winds down, the dogs are let loose to clean up the floor, the trenchers are tossed, and the nobles recline like overstuffed leeches on benches they now realise have no backs. Someone passes out. Someone proposes a duel. Someone else throws up behind a tapestry. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, belch loudly, a sign of appreciation, and wonder if that pigeon you ate had been cooked all the way through. It's a dangerous thought, but it's too late now. You're full, you're flushed, and you're 1 goose bone away from meeting your ancestors. And that, dear noble, is what it means to feast like royalty. Opulent, overcooked, absolutely lacking forks. Tomorrow, you'll do it again. And with any luck, you'll only get mild indigestion instead of full-blown medieval food poisoning. But we're just getting started, because now that you've eaten enough calories to fight a war, it's time to actually go do that. You've just finished a noble feast. Roast goose, trenchers dripping in oily stew, and a pudding that may or may not have been mostly suet and hope. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, where did all this come from? Who cooked it? How did it get from raw animal carcass to your gilded table? Welcome to the castle kitchen, where meals are forged in fire, tears, and mild emotional trauma. It's not a kitchen, it's a medieval war zone, and the only thing more dangerous than the fire is the guy holding the ladle like it's a weapon, which, in this environment, it might be. Picture this: a cavernous stone room, tucked deep within the castle, far from the elegant dining hall you just graced with your very presence. Why is it far away? Because it smells like roasted regret, charred meat, scorched hair, boiling turnips, old grease, and the unmistakable funk of 15 servants sweating into a single cauldron. It's less kitchen and more flammable dungeon with ambition. The temperature is somewhere between uncomfortable and surface of the sun. Fires roar in multiple hearths, fueled by logs the size of teenage squires. There are no chimneys, just hope, and maybe a few ceiling holes, if your castle's architect was feeling generous. Smoke hangs in the air like a judgment cloud, making everyone weep and nobody cleaner. The head cook, a human furnace with a permanently stained apron and 400 years of internalized rage, commands the room. He knows every recipe, every cut of meat, and the precise volume a cauldron can hold before it boils over and claims another apprentice. He doesn't speak. He barks. Orders, insults, and occasionally the names of saints when the fire gets too close to the rack of pheasants dangling ominously from the ceiling. Let's talk equipment. You've got one massive cauldron, blackened from generations of boiling things no one can fully identify. There's a spit over the fire, where entire animals slowly rotate while being basted with a brush made of twigs and something uncomfortably greasy. A few knives, a couple of wooden spoons the size of oars, and a pile of cutting boards that double as shields during spice-related disputes. And that's it. That's the gear. Food prep isn't done on marble countertops. It's done on wooden slabs, slick with history, next to barrels full of fish staring at you with dead-eyed judgment. Storage? It's whatever room is cold enough to keep meat mostly alive. Adjacent. There's a larder where entire animal carcasses hang like grisly chandeliers. There's a pantry with sacks of flour, baskets of root vegetables, and possibly something growling in the dark corner. No one's checked since Michaelmas. Sanitation? That's adorable. There's no such thing. Knives are wiped on aprons. Hands are cleaned with a communal rag that hasn't been dry since the Crusades. Dishes are rinsed in a barrel of water that started clear but is now the colour of mead and emotional damage. If something falls on the floor, it's picked up, dusted off, and muttered over like a wounded knight. 3-second rule? In the castle kitchen, it's the still got texture rule. Now for the staff. You've got a full army of underpaid, overworked, soot-covered culinary warriors. Spit boys, actual job title, are children assigned to rotate the roasting meat manually for hours. They sit next to the fire, blinking through smoke, slowly turning a metal rod, and questioning every decision that led them here. Their future? Blisters and therapy that won't exist for 600 years. Then there are the scullions, bottom-rung kitchen help, who scrub the pots, haul the water, and take the blame for everything that goes wrong. They are covered in soot, bruises, and beef tallow. Their lives are a cycle of burning, slipping, and praying. The Lord's dog doesn't bite them again while they're trying to carry goose grease across the corridor. Above them, kitchen boys and girls chop ingredients with terrifying efficiency, and an even more terrifying disregard for finger safety. There are no cutting gloves. There's just skill, speed, and adrenaline. One wrong move, and someone's carrot has a little extra protein. The kitchen also includes bakers, brewers, butchers, and the occasional weird guy in the corner who's been pickling things for 7 years and doesn't blink when you ask what it is. Nobody questions him. His jars glow faintly, and we all just move on. Everything here is hot, fast, loud, and lethal. The kitchen never stops. While the nobles dine, the staff is already prepping for the next meal. Breakfast starts getting cooked while the fires for supper are still dying down. Rest? What's that? Sleep? That's for the people eating the duck confit, not the ones flaying it in a cloud of ash and panic. Sometimes, the lord of the castle decides to throw a feast for 200 guests with 5 minutes' notice, just to show off. This triggers a full kitchen meltdown. Everyone screams, everyone runs. Someone's chasing a chicken that's now escaped into the herb garden. Someone else is trying to figure out how to make a boar look majestic, and not like a failed taxidermy project. There's blood. There's tears. There's a guy vomiting from stress into the pastry dough. All while the clock ticks. Because no matter how chaotic it is down here, the food must arrive upstairs on time, and still hot. Which is a logistical miracle, considering the kitchen is 4,000 stairs, and 1 full temperature zone away from the Great Hall. Food is carried in covered dishes by servants sprinting through corridors, trying not to slip, trip, or be stabbed by another servant coming the other way, with a jug of hot mead and 0 peripheral vision. And when something goes wrong, which it always does, no one blames the noble who wanted 20 different meats in the shape of a swan. No, the blame falls directly on the kitchen. A sauce too cold? The cook is shamed. Bread slightly burnt? The baker's name will be cursed for 3 generations. A bone in the stew? Treason. Witchcraft? Maybe both. Let's also not forget that half the ingredients are seasonally limited or imported with drama. Spices like saffron or cinnamon arrive in tiny, precious quantities guarded like holy relics. If you waste them, you might as well turn yourself into the nearest monastery. And fresh produce? Good luck. You're at the mercy of the local climate, the gardener's mood, and whether or not a goat broke into the radish patch again. Bon appetit. So, you've eaten your 6-course meat parade. You've sweated through 12 pounds of wool. You've successfully pretended to care about land taxes and grain rot. Now what? You, dear noble, are spectacularly bored. Because while you may live in a giant castle with 30 rooms and a hallway that could host a jousting tournament, there is absolutely nothing to do. No Netflix, no books worth reading unless you like Latin sermons, no spa, no sports, no leisurely scroll through cat memes, just you, your own thoughts, which are mostly about gout and inheritance, and a staff of servants wondering why you keep sighing so loudly. But fear not, medieval aristocracy had its own brand of entertainment. And by entertainment, we mean activities that would be considered either hobbies or passive-aggressive warfare today. Let's begin with the royal MVP of forced fun, the court jester. Yes, you actually hired a man, sometimes a child, sometimes just your cousin Geoffrey in a funny hat, to make jokes for your amusement. Jesters wore bells. They danced, they juggled, they recited crude poems about your enemies, your exes, and occasionally your mother-in-law, if you were feeling spicy. Were they funny? Not usually, but you laughed anyway because not laughing made it awkward or dangerous. And the jester knows where the chamber pot is stored. Their jokes ranged from harmless puns about flatulence to thinly veiled roasts of your politics. Think medieval stand-up comedy, except if the audience got offended, you could be flogged or beheaded. No pressure. Jesters weren't just clowns, though. They were also your unofficial therapists, court spies, and walking satire machines. They were the only people allowed to speak truth to power, as long as they were wearing tights and a jingling hat shaped like regret. When the jester's act grew stale, which it always did after joke number 3 about the bishop's illegitimate child, you turned to the next great noble pastime, hunting. Hunting was not just a sport, it was a full-blown ritual involving horses, dogs, horn-blowing, shouting, sweating, and the occasional peasant being accidentally trampled. It wasn't really about catching anything, it was about dressing the part, riding through the forest like a sweaty war god, and pretending to know what you're doing while yelling, "Tally-ho," at a squirrel. And let's be honest, most of the actual hunting was done by your handlers. You mostly showed up for the dramatic entrance and claimed credit when a deer finally gave up from exhaustion. If hunting was too much cardio, you could always go hawking. That's right, you, a full-grown noble person, strapped a tiny leather hood on a bird of prey, stood in a meadow looking majestic, and pretended you understood falconry. Falcons were status symbols. The fancier the bird, the fancier the owner. Some nobles carried their birds everywhere, at dinner, in meetings, to bed. Nothing says power like cradling a literal murder pigeon while shouting at your steward about barley quotas. Of course, training a falcon was complicated, and often delegated to a falconer, which meant you mostly just stood around stroking your bird and waiting for it to come back. Spoiler, sometimes it didn't. And then you'd have to pretend it was intentional, like, "Ah, yes, I released it into the wind," as a metaphor. When birds weren't enough, there was always music, because nothing chases away noble ennui like a well-plucked lute. Enter the minstrels. Minstrels were musicians, singers, and occasionally dramatic interpretive dancers who wandered from castle to castle in search of food, coin, and someone who wouldn't throw turnips at them. They sang ballads about heroic deeds, star-crossed lovers, and mysterious maidens who may or may not have been metaphors for cheese. If you had money, you kept a resident minstrel, who became the medieval equivalent of your Spotify playlist, except you had to feed him and occasionally pretend to care about his new ballad, about a guy who died of heartbreak, read gout. Sometimes, two noble houses would engage in musical duels, where minstrels tried to out-sing each other with passive-aggressive lyrics. It was like rap battles, if rap battles involved more lutes and fewer rhymes that made sense. The winner? Whoever rhymed chastity with majesty without making everyone cry. And what about the ladies, you ask? Surely they had pastimes of their own. Oh, absolutely. If you were a noblewoman in a castle, your entertainment options included embroidery, weaving, praying, and pretending not to be plotting against your husband. You sat in solar chambers, needle in hand, crafting tapestries that depicted glorious battles you never saw, and domestic bliss you never experienced. Embroidery was more than a hobby. It was therapy, storytelling, and low-key activism, all stitched into fabric. If you were clever, you might hide secret messages in your needlework. If you were bored, you might just stitch the same unicorn 47 times while fantasizing about stabbing someone with your embroidery needle. Some women read books, if they could read, and if the books weren't just biblical parables or Latin treatises on why joy is sinful. Others wrote letters, long, emotionally loaded letters about court life, garden mildew, and the new steward who keeps accidentally brushing against your sleeve. There were also games, chess, dice, backgammon, and something called Nine Men's Morris, which sounds like a tavern brawl, but is actually a board game involving tiny tokens and endless confusion. Gambling was popular, but frowned upon by the church, which meant it was extra fun. You could lose your horse, your ring, your dignity, all before breakfast. And then there were feasts, again, because when in doubt, just eat and drink until boredom slips into a gentle meat coma. Feasts weren't just meals, they were performances. There was music, dancing, fire juggling, bear baiting, poetry, wrestling, and occasionally dwarfs riding pigs for sport. Yes, really. Medieval people got creative when faced with the crushing weight of too much leisure time and no HBO. But perhaps the most popular pastime of all, court intrigue. Nothing passes time quite like plotting, gossiping, and subtly destroying your enemies with a well-timed rumour. Noble life was basically one long, drawn-out episode of Game of Thrones, minus the dragons and with more boils. You schemed for land. You arranged strategic marriages. You whispered about your rival's fertility and mysteriously glowing skin. Was someone suddenly gaining favour with the king? Time to suggest they're in league with the devil. Did your cousin inherit the manor you wanted, accuse them of heresy, or make their falcon accidentally go missing? The possibilities were endless, as long as you didn't get caught. And through it all, you were expected to look graceful, poised, dignified, which meant smiling through your ennui while watching your husband attempt to compose a sonnet and rhyming beloved with shoved. Again. But let's be honest. For all the feasts, the birds, the minstrels, the lute duels, and the dramatic tapestries, most noble entertainment boiled down to this. Waiting. Waiting for letters, waiting for news, waiting for heirs, guests, rain, spring, war, inheritance, or death. Time moved differently in the castle, slowly, politely, and always just a bit too quietly, so you filled it with distraction, with noise, colour, gossip, and laughter you weren't always sure was genuine. You were rich, powerful, admired, and yet somehow spectacularly bored. Because wealth doesn't guarantee happiness. It just buys better clothes to sulk in. You wake up in your drafty, half-lit chamber to the sound of someone else breathing in your direction. Not with affection, but because they're kneeling beside your bed, silently waiting to help you stand upright. You don't know their name, you don't ask, but they know yours, your favourite socks, and the location of the boil on your back you keep pretending doesn't exist. You see, life in a castle doesn't happen because of divine right or superior lineage. It happens because an entire subterranean society of servants is working around the clock to keep you clean, clothed, and blissfully unaware of how little you contribute to your own survival. You're not the hero of this story. You're the unpaid mascot for a human ant colony that sweats itself into oblivion, so your fire stays lit and your soup arrives not actively screaming. At the top of this invisible mountain stands your Chamberlain. He is your shadow manager, your fiscal babysitter, your daily damage control department. He tracks your household accounts, coordinates your schedule, and has memorized the precise degree of tilt your wine goblet requires to avoid another embarrassing tunic stain. He is the one servant you might remember on purpose. Everyone else exists as a blur of elbows and lowered eyes, unless they mess up, of course. Then suddenly they're very visible and very fired. Somewhere down the hall, a laundress is boiling your linens in a pot that smells like pain and turnips. She's been up since before sunrise, scrubbing crusted wool that's been marinating in your body oil since last Michaelmas. You've never seen her, but she's seen things clinging to your undergarments that defy logic, hygiene, and basic human decency. Still, she washes it all, by hand, in freezing water, with soap made from lard and desperation, because your breeches don't bleach themselves, and you insisted on wearing white to a feast involving 6 types of grease. And speaking of that feast, remember the roast swan? The one with the little crown and the aggressive aroma? That was summoned from the depths of hell by your cook, who hasn't slept since the last full moon. He commands the castle's hottest room, shouting over a roaring fire while juggling 20 dishes, 17 staff members, and 3 live animals that shouldn't be in the kitchen, but definitely are. The cook is permanently sweaty, profoundly bitter, and fueled entirely by adrenaline and the fear of under-seasoning. When you offhandedly complain that your stew was a little bland, he goes very still, and for a moment, the air tastes like murder. Outside the kitchen, guards are posted at strategic points throughout the castle. These men are technically here to protect you from intruders, but mostly they just lean on halberds and pretend not to fall asleep during long, cold night shifts. Occasionally they bark at peasants for breathing too close to the castle wall. They wear chainmail, look stern, and say things like, "Halt!" and "Who goes there?" even when they have absolutely no idea who goes where. You pay them in coin and vague promises of glory. They protect you from things like bandits, rival nobles, and your own inability to make basic decisions. Meanwhile, the steward runs the numbers. He is the reason your granary hasn't collapsed, your beer supplies are intact, and your pigs haven't staged an uprising. He tracks inventory, rations supplies, and quietly fixes everything you break, physically, financially, and socially. He knows that your cousin Gerald is skimming off the wine shipments, but he says nothing, because Gerald is family, and you are nobility, and both of you are far too delicate for confrontation. In another wing of the castle, a young page is practicing how to bow without tripping. He's 12, noble-born, and deeply awkward. His job is to stand near important people, carry messages, and occasionally spill soup onto his own shoes while looking terrified. You call this education. He calls it purgatory. The scullery maid is far below, scrubbing your discarded trenchers in water that stopped being clean sometime before sunrise. She carries firewood, hauls water, sweeps floors, and removes things from the garderobe that no human being should ever have to touch. Her day starts with hauling buckets and ends with hauling buckets. Her only escape is sleep, which comes in a corner of the kitchen near the potatoes when no one is looking. She is 17, has the upper body strength of a blacksmith, and dreams of one day owning her own wooden spoon. Then there are the ones who deal with the things you most pretend don't exist. Your bodily waste, for example. The unfortunate souls responsible for emptying the chamber pots and cleaning out the guardrobes are the true unsung martyrs of medieval life. They carry buckets of human sadness down spiral staircases, slick with condensation, and up again before the sun is fully risen. Their job is simple. Ensure your waste does not become a health hazard or a social scandal. You've never thanked them. No one has. But without them, your castle would be a literal cesspool. And there's still the jester, hovering in the periphery of noble entertainment, like a very nervous court piñata. You laugh at his jokes not because they're funny, but because not laughing might imply disloyalty, which could spiral quickly into awkward dungeon conversations. He juggles, dances, tells stories, and occasionally slips a little truth into his humour, just to see if anyone flinches. If he pushes too far, he's replaced. If he doesn't push far enough, he's boring. It's a high-wire act performed in shoes with bells and no health insurance. But even among the servants there's a hierarchy. The chamberlain outranks the cook, who outranks the kitchen boy, who outranks the scullion, who outranks absolutely no one except possibly the dog. Orders flow downward. Blame flows upward in a very specific funnel of denial. Everyone has someone beneath them to shout at, except the unfortunate soul at the bottom of the chain, who just clenches their jaw and keeps scrubbing. You, of course, are blissfully unaware of all this. You don't see the mop-up after your tantrums, or the panic behind the scenes when the roast partridge arrives slightly pink. You don't see the maid who cries quietly while sewing your 6th pair of ceremonial hose. You certainly don't know the name of the boy who lit the 27 candles in the banquet hall and extinguished them again after you left without saying goodnight. To you, these people are fixtures, like chairs or firewood, or that one tapestry you swear has been staring at you lately. But in truth, they are the heartbeat of the castle. Without them, you'd be cold, naked, starving, and ankle-deep in your own filth. They make your luxury possible. They make your reality tolerable. They carry your world on their sore, soot-blackened shoulders. And still, you won't remember their names. But they'll remember yours, forever. Court life sounds glamorous. Feasts, fashion, and flirtation by candlelight. But peel back the velvet curtain, and what you're really looking at is a blood sport with better tableware. The castle isn't a cosy family estate. It's a human chessboard where every smile is a lie, every compliment a trap, and every goblet might be your last drink if you've annoyed the wrong duke. Welcome to the real court, equal parts social battlefield and medieval reality show. It's not Game of Thrones. It's worse. There are no dragons to burn your enemies. Only sarcasm, gossip, and very expensive passive aggression. Let's get one thing clear. The court isn't about power. It's about perception of power. Actual influence is slippery, fragile, and dependent on things like inheritance, titles, how many retainers you can summon in under an hour, and whether your beard is full enough to demand respect or patchy enough to invite ridicule. But perceived influence, that's where the true danger lies. You don't need to own land. You just need people to think you're important. That's how you survive. That's how you thrive. That's how you avoid being quietly removed from history via poisoned custard and a funeral no one attends. The moment you step into the Great Hall, you are being evaluated. Who are you standing next to? What are you wearing? Is your cloak embroidered with gold thread, or something tragic like cabbage dye? Did you bow too low to the countess? Not low enough to the bishop? Did your laugh at the jester's joke sound genuine or rehearsed? Congratulations, you've already lost. Because court life is a full-time performance, and you forgot your script. The first weapon in this social armory, fashion. Your outfit is not clothing, it's a resume. The more layers, jewels and silks you drape across your shivering, lice-nervous body, the more you're declaring, I matter. I own at least 3 sheep, possibly more. Colours are coded. Purple means royalty or deep debt. Red means boldness or aggressive desperation. Green means fertility or mould. You never know until it's too late. Your belt says how wealthy you are. Your shoes say how recently you've been outside. Your hat, that's the big one. A tall hat means importance. A tall hat with feathers means ambition. A tall hat with moving parts means you are definitely going to be assassinated. But clothing is just the opening act. The real show starts with conversation. Every word is currency. Every pause, a test. You don't speak freely. you speak strategically. Your greetings must be warm, but not too warm. Your flattery should be obvious enough to be understood, but subtle enough to be denied. Never say anything too clearly. Always leave room for interpretation, misinterpretation, and plausible deniability. Let's say you're complimenting Lady Beatrice on her gown. A novice might say, "You look lovely today." Amateur. The seasoned courtier says, "That colour suits you more than I'd have expected." Which sounds nice, until Beatrice spends the rest of the night wondering what colour you expected her to wear, and whether she should be insulted. Gossip isn't just entertainment, it's survival. It's how alliances are formed, how reputations are shredded, and how entire families are ruined without ever swinging a sword. If you're not spreading it, you're absorbing it, storing it, and weaponizing it for later. Secrets are the court's unofficial currency. Who's sleeping with whom? Who's bankrupt, but pretending not to be? Who's been whispering with the bishop during matins, and now mysteriously owns a new brooch? Sometimes the gossip is true. Sometimes it's useful. Most times it's strategic nonsense, floated through the banquet hall on a wave of wine and fake laughter to see who bites. You don't need truth. You need advantage. If the Countess is said to be ill, you're already writing condolence letters before she even sneezes. If a knight is rumoured to be impotent, you don't care about his health. You care about how fast that rumour spreads, and which alliances it unravels. The most dangerous kind of gossip, of course, is the kind you don't hear. The whispered secrets passed in dark hallways or muttered in chapel corners. If you find out about a scandal last, you might as well retire to a monastery and start growing beets. Because at court, ignorance is death by 1,000 smirks. Then there's the matter of allies. No one navigates the court alone unless they're actively trying to be murdered with a letter opener. You need a circle, a faction, a group of vaguely trustworthy people who can boost your status, echo your lies, and pretend to like your children. Choose them wisely. Too powerful, and they'll use you. Too weak, and you'll be dragged down when they inevitably embarrass themselves at the spring feast by misquoting the Psalms or tripping into the gravy boat. But don't get too comfortable. Today's ally is tomorrow's rival, is next week's witness at your heresy trial. The key to court politics isn't loyalty. It's adaptability. Know when to switch sides. Know how to compliment your enemy's horse without throwing up in your mouth. Know how to smile while someone publicly steals your inheritance with a forged seal and a very smug priest. Romance exists at court, but only in the same way snakes exist in a garden. Beautiful, deadly, and often disguised as something poetic. Affairs are rampant, discreet only in theory, and always tied to political leverage. Marriages are contracts. Flirtation is currency. Love letters are usually dictated to scribes who also write legal threats on Tuesdays. If you catch feelings at court, you're either incredibly naive or already poisoned. Speaking of which, poison. Always on the menu. Not just in food, but in tone, in glances, in carefully planned seating arrangements. You don't want to sit too far from the Lord, because that's a snub. But you don't want to sit too close, because that's suspicious. Ideally, you sit close enough to be heard, far enough to flee, and with a full view of the wine jug at all times. Taste testers aren't a luxury, they're your first line of defense. And if your tester collapses mid-dinner, you keep eating, slowly, casually, like nothing happened, because panicking makes you look guilty. Even gestures are political. Bow too deeply, and you look servile. Not enough, and you're arrogant. Raise a toast, but make sure your glass isn't higher than the Duke's, or lower than the merchant's, unless you want to start an international incident over beer foam. Eye contact must be sustained, but not aggressive. A glance too long suggests intrigue. Too short, and they'll think you're hiding something. In truth, you are hiding something, but they don't need to know that. At some point, you'll be invited to a private chamber for a talk. This is not a talk. This is a test. You will be offered wine. Drink it slowly. You will be asked questions with no correct answers. Answer vaguely. You will be watched, not for what you say, but for what you reveal when you try not to say anything. And if someone touches your shoulder gently while saying your name, you are either being recruited into a conspiracy or quietly threatened. Possibly both. Even religion is weaponized. Piety is performative. Who kneels longest, fasts hardest, or crosses themselves with the most dramatic flair? It's all a game. The most ruthless courtiers attend Mass daily and confess nothing. The bishop smiles serenely while cataloguing your sins for future use. Holiness is just another costume, like your brocade doublet, or your false humility. And through all of this, the smiling, the bowing, the praising, the subtle death threats disguised as compliments, you must remember one thing. You are always being watched. At court, walls have ears, tapestries have eyes, and the jester has an incredible memory. One wrong word, and you're the next scandal. One wrong step, and you're suddenly very interested in retiring to the countryside. So you nod, you smile, you toast. You compliment the lady's headdress that looks like a poultry rack in mourning. You laugh at the joke you've heard 14 times. You pretend not to hear the baron's cough that might signal plague or poison, or just a bad grape. And you keep playing, because at court there are no winners, just survivors. And those who fail, they become stories, told in a whisper, over wine, while someone else smiles. You stink, and not in a charming, "Oh, he's been out in the garden tending roses" way. No, you smell like a wool cloak dipped in beef stew and stored in a goat pen. And that's on a good day. On a bad day, you're one strong breeze away from being declared a public health emergency. But that's fine, because in your castle, your glorious, drafty, parasite-loving castle, bathing is optional, seasonal, and widely misunderstood. Let's start with the basics. In the medieval noble imagination, dirt is not the enemy. It is, in fact, something closer to a protective shield, like armour, but crustier. The idea that filth could block disease was very popular among people who had no concept of bacteria, but an intense distrust of moisture. Water, they believed, could open your pores, and through those dangerous, traitorous pores, disease might slip in and ruin everything. So what do you do instead of bathing? You dust yourself with scented powders. You hang sweet herbs in your clothes. You pray. You change your undertunic once every few weeks and call it airing out. You scrape off visible grime with a knife and insist that counts as skincare. Congratulations, you're clean now, spiritually. And yet, sometimes, just sometimes, you must submit to the dreaded ritual of the bath. Not because you believe in it, but because your steward won't stop coughing when he walks past you, and a passing noblewoman fainted near your armpit. So, reluctantly, ceremoniously, you schedule a bath. Yes, schedule. Because bathing is not a spontaneous act of refreshment. It is a logistical operation that requires hours of planning, multiple servants, and a level of fire safety you absolutely don't have. First, the bath must be prepared. A large wooden tub, slightly splintery, is dragged from storage. It smells faintly of old fish and despair. The tub is placed in the warmest room available, which is still freezing, but at least only partially haunted. Then begins the water haul. Dozens of trips to the well, followed by careful heating over open flames. This water is then poured, bucket by bucket, into the tub while you lounge nearby, eating pears and pretending you're not worried about getting splashed. If you're high-ranking enough, your bath might be infused with herbs, rosemary, lavender, mint, or just something vaguely leafy. Your servant swears is good for boils. The water may be brown, it might be green, but you nod approvingly because pretending to know what's happening is half the job. Once the bath is ready, you disrobe. Slowly, regally, with deep shame. And now, into the tub. It's lukewarm, slightly slimy, suspiciously bubbly, despite no one adding soap. You lower yourself in like a knight approaching a trap. You try not to touch the sides. You pretend it's relaxing. You make conversation with the servant who's still stirring the fire, because making eye contact during a bath is weird, but so is silence. You are naked. You are vulnerable. You are surrounded by witnesses, because privacy is a lie. There are always at least 2 people present while you bathe, one to pour water and one to pretend not to stare. Sometimes more. If it's a special occasion, you might have guests. Yes, bathing was once considered a social event. Friends might join, strangers might observe, your cousin might wander in to complain about the grain tax. It's like a spa day, except everyone is uncomfortable and the water is grey. The tub is shallow. Your knees stick out. Your back hurts. The soap, if you have it, is rough, homemade, and smells like old tallow mixed with whatever herb was left in the garden. You scrub gently, because vigorous cleaning might open those traitorous pores. Then you rinse with more water, poured slowly by a servant who's been doing this since sunrise and hasn't blinked since. After the bath, you are dried with linen, not washed linen, just linen, sometimes warmed by the fire, often not. You step out, shivering, and are immediately redressed in 10 pounds of damp wool. The bath is now over. You feel clean, in the sense that you no longer smell like a meat cellar. You've survived. Barely. The water is not drained. It is reused. Not by you, of course. By everyone else. The household staff takes turns. They go in order of status. The cook, the steward, the page. By the time the scullery maid steps in, she's bathing in something that closely resembles beef broth. It's democratic. It's disgusting. It's medieval. But maybe you're lucky. Maybe you have a private bathhouse, a tiled room with a large stone basin, heated floors, and a ceiling that drips mysteriously. You only use it once a month, maybe twice, if you've committed a sin that requires actual soap. There are candles, mosaics, a faint smell of mildew. This is considered luxury, and also a breeding ground for mould, ghosts, and political intrigue. Because baths are not safe, not socially, not medically. People have been known to die after bathing, not from the bath itself, but from what comes after, catching cold, catching fever, catching the attention of someone who thinks you look suspiciously refreshed. If you start bathing too often, people worry. They whisper, "Why is he so clean? What is he hiding? Did he murder someone? Is he French?" Even the church gets involved. Bathing is considered decadent, sinful. There's something unholy about too much cleanliness. Monks bathe rarely, saints even less. A holy man should stink. It's how you know he's busy thinking about God and not his pores. In some circles, the more you smell, the more likely you are to get into heaven. And yet, you long for it. The feeling of warmth, the sensation of being less coated in historical residue. You try not to think about it. You tell yourself the dirt is part of you, that the grime protects you, that the sweat on your neck is natural, noble, even charming. But deep down, you know the truth. You are a human stew, and your bath, whenever it comes, is not about cleanliness. It's about symbolic purification, a rare, delicate pause in a life of filth, noise, and ceremonial foot powder. You'll enjoy it while it lasts, which is approximately 17 minutes. Then it's back to wool, sweat, and the comforting stench of unexamined nobility. You emerge from your bath, glistening, pink, and slightly stunned. You've done it. You've bathed. Once. That should hold you over for a season or two. Maybe until Lent. Maybe until death. Whichever comes first. Because in the end, cleanliness is fleeting. But odour is eternal. Night falls in the castle like a blanket of dread, and you, noble baron of questionable hygiene and deeply suspect lineage, shuffle off to bed, or rather, to the idea of a bed. Because in your medieval castle, Going to sleep isn't about drifting peacefully into dreams. It's about survival. It's about staving off frostbite, dodging rodents, and trying not to suffocate on the sleep breath of your third cousin Gerald, who's snoring directly into your eye socket. You don't sleep alone. No one sleeps alone. Privacy is a Renaissance invention. Here in the 13th century, bedrooms are social spaces. They're where you eat, pray, change your stockings, and have three unrelated humans involuntarily curled around you like a pile of damp laundry. This isn't weird. This is standard noble sleep protocol. You share your chamber with siblings, cousins, visiting knights, a minstrel you forgot to kick out, and the occasional monk who just needed somewhere to stay for the night 6 months ago. Let's start with the room itself. It's large, echoing, and permanently chilly. The walls are stone. The floor is stone. The ceiling is probably stone. There's a draft so persistent it should be given a title and land. Wind whistles through gaps in the window shutters, and on especially gusty nights, the whole place sounds like it's being haunted by a choir of disappointed ghosts. That, or it's just your uncle's digestion. The fire in the hearth is meant to warm you, but it's more decorative than effective. It crackles faintly under a log that's still damp from last week's rain. You've got 2 servants tending it, one to poke the embers aggressively, the other to silently pray that no one asks why there's smoke but no heat. You're wrapped in layers, night tunic, woolen socks, and a blanket thick enough to smother a cow. Despite all this, your nose is frozen. You sniffle like a doomed candle. Your bed is technically fancy. It's made of carved wood, raised high above the floor, because rats, and draped with thick curtains, because judgment. The mattress is stuffed with straw, which is a lovely medieval way of saying it crinkles when you move and smells vaguely of compost. Over time, the straw compresses and rearranges itself into topographical features, somewhere between a spine realignment tool and a passive-aggressive punishment for existing. Now, let's talk about who's in your bed. Because again, you are not alone. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's a sibling. Maybe it's a page boy who was supposed to sleep on the floor, but accidentally climbed in during a thunderstorm 2 months ago and never left. And then there's Gerald. Gerald is family. Gerald is always there. Gerald eats garlic and breathes directly at you. Gerald's feet are everywhere. There is no escape. Even in the rare chance you have a room to yourself, your solitude is theoretical. Servants come in and out constantly, to stoke the fire, to deliver messages, to check on your socks. One of them sleeps in the corner. Another curls up near the door. A third one sleeps standing, eyes open, for reasons no one understands. You try to pretend they're invisible. They try to pretend you're not snoring like a dying bagpipe. You blow out your candle, tuck your blanket to your chin, and close your eyes. Immediately, the itching starts. Because it's not just you and Gerald. It's you, Gerald, and the ecosystem. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs, your real, long-term companions. These creatures live rent-free in your sheets, your hair, and occasionally your dreams. Everyone has them. Even queens. Even popes. Especially popes. You scratch discreetly. Gerald scratches audibly. You don't speak of it. It's just bedtime ambience. Then come the noises. A mouse scurries across the beams above your head. Something larger thumps softly in the wall. Maybe it's a cat. Maybe it's a ghost. Maybe it's Gerald's stomach working through those questionable pickled onions from supper. You hear wind howling through the cracks in the walls, moaning like a vengeful spirit, or a monk with regrets. You try to sleep, but the castle creaks and sighs like a ship at sea. Someone in the next chamber coughs. Someone down the corridor farts. Someone near the stairs drops something heavy, and then swears creatively for 20 seconds. You pull your blanket over your head, but it's wool, so now you're sweating and suffocating. Welcome to medieval temperature control. It's either frozen feet or boiled head. Choose your misery. Eventually, you begin to drift off. Then someone rolls over and takes all the covers. You lie there, cold, angry, and deeply aware that you're not getting them back. The blanket is gone. Gerald is cocooned like a smug moth. You contemplate violence. Instead, you shiver in silence and curse his ancestors. Time passes. You start to dream. Then, you wake up suddenly. You've forgotten something important. The chamber pot. Or rather, the absence of the chamber pot. Because it's dark, and someone moved it. And now, at 2 a.m, you are faced with a medieval moral crisis. Do you wake a servant? Do you stumble blindly toward the corner and hope for the best? Or do you just wait until morning and pray that your bladder forgives you? You choose dignity, and then regret it immediately. Eventually, the castle settles. The fire dies. The room grows quiet. Gerald stops breathing in your direction. You drift again, into a sleep that's light, restless, and vaguely threatening. You dream of falling off parapets, of being late for mass, of your aunt's face yelling about your shoes. You wake every hour. You wake tired, because medieval sleep doesn't refresh you. It's more of a pause in your suffering. Then, before the sun rises, the bell rings, loud, merciless. Somewhere, a rooster screams. Servants begin their rustling. Doors creak open. Someone coughs aggressively in the hallway. Gerald rolls over and knees you in the ribs. It's morning. You've slept, technically. You rise stiffly, scratch your armpit, and begin the ritual of pretending you rested. Your clothes are folded by the fire. Your shoes are cold. Your breath fogs in the air. You pretend the castle isn't haunted. You pretend Gerald isn't humming through his nose. You pretend this is normal. Because it is. This is sleep in the Middle Ages. Not peaceful, not quiet, not restorative. Just you, your cousins, and an army of bedbugs, waiting for night to fall again. You wake up one morning, stretch your arms over the straw-stuffed mattress, and think to yourself, is my home defensible enough to repel 100 armed men riding angry horses and yelling in Old French? Because in the Middle Ages, home security isn't a deadbolt and a ring camera. It's a system of architectural sadism designed to repel enemies, confuse guests, and emotionally scar your enemies before they even breach the outer wall. Your castle isn't just a home. It's a fortress powered by trust issues and an absolutely unhinged commitment to paranoia. Let's start at the perimeter. Moats. Not elegant swan-filled ponds. These are sludgy, foul trenches of mud, algae, and questionable eels. You dig them deep, line them with stakes, and fill them with water stolen from a nearby river, or God's tears. The idea is to slow attackers down, or drown them, before they even touch your walls. But mostly, the moat just becomes a medieval soup of fish, frogs, mosquitoes, and whatever your enemies left behind. Last time they tried something stupid. To cross the moat, a drawbridge, a wooden platform operated by a winch and at least 2 nervous men who are underpaid and wildly overconfident in their upper body strength. The drawbridge can be lifted in a dramatic, clanking arc of defiance at the first sign of trouble or a suspiciously aggressive pigeon, and when it's up, it's up. That means no one in, no one out, and you're stuck explaining to the Baroness why her cousin is still outside shouting for someone to let him in before he freezes to death. But you're not done. Next comes the gatehouse, which is less welcoming foyer and more giant trap disguised as architecture. It's a funnel of doom, where any intruder who makes it past the drawbridge finds themselves trapped in a narrow tunnel beneath an opening known as the murder hole. That's not slang. That's the actual term. A hole for murder. Located directly above the entry path, so you can pour boiling oil, rocks, scalding water, burning sand, or raw emotional trauma down onto your guests. Hospitality? No. Hostility? Absolutely. On either side of the murder tunnel, there are portcullises, heavy iron grates that slam down faster than your ex's opinion of you after a failed banquet speech. Once inside the gatehouse, invaders are trapped between two portcullises, while archers, above and to the sides, shoot arrows through narrow slits with all the mercy of a tax auditor with a grudge. It's a steel, stone, and arrow-based panic attack. And that's just the front door. Move past the gatehouse, assuming you're not bleeding, burning, or actively regretting your career choices, and you face the courtyard. But beware, this area is not your friend. It's open, exposed, and strategically designed to be a killing field if necessary. The walls loom high above you. The stairs curve in a direction specifically chosen to favour right-handed defenders and disorient attackers. Everything about a castle screams one thing: you are not welcome here. Now, let's talk walls. High, thick, relentlessly indifferent to your feelings, often built with multiple layers, stone on the outside, rubble in the middle, more stone on the inside. The outer wall is sometimes reinforced with towers, giving defenders a lovely elevated perch from which to rain death on intruders while sipping something warm and condescending. The tops of the walls feature crenellations, those alternating gaps and blocks you associate with castle silhouettes. You hide behind the blocks, merlons, pop out of the gaps, embrasures, and let your enemies know they should have stayed home and tried therapy. Should attackers bring a siege tower or a battering ram, good for them. Let's introduce them to hoardings, temporary wooden balconies built on the outside of walls, allowing defenders to drop projectiles directly down onto enemies without leaving the safety of the parapet. They're like evil balconies, designed not for sunbathing, but for strategic gravity-based homicide. But maybe your enemies are persistent. Maybe they breach the outer wall. Do not worry. Your castle is layered like an onion of despair. Inside the outer curtain is the inner bailey, a second courtyard surrounded by more walls, towers, and pure contempt for architectural simplicity. Within the inner bailey lies the keep, the last bastion, the most secure, thick-walled, angry rectangle of stone imaginable. It's your final refuge, your emergency bunker, your panic room with worse lighting and better murder options. The keep is designed to be defensible even after the rest of the castle falls. The stairs are narrow, the hallways twist, the windows are just wide enough for an arrow, but not for a human. The doors are barred, the air is stale. It's essentially a tomb you live in, if you're lucky. If not, it becomes a tomb you die in, but at least dramatically, and probably with a sword in your hand. And speaking of stairs, let's talk about those demonic spirals. They don't go up, they coil. Specifically, they spiral clockwise as you ascend. Why? Because most attackers are right-handed. This means they struggle to swing their swords in the tight, twisting staircase, while defenders coming down have the advantage of both the outer curve and gravity. That's right. Your staircase has been weaponized. It is a corkscrew of psychological warfare, also a tripping hazard. Every door in your castle has a bar slot, a horizontal hole behind it, where a beam can be slid through to keep people out. Every window has a shutter. Every shutter has a bolt. Every bolt has a smaller, secret bolt, and all of it can be locked from the inside by someone who doesn't trust anyone they've ever met. This includes you. If you're under siege for a long time, and trust me, you will be, you'll need food supplies. That means granaries, salted meats, dried beans, and barrels of beer stored in cool, dark rooms you're absolutely not allowed to enter. Why? Because food security is so important that even your kitchen staff might not know how much is left. It's all calculated to last for months, ideally until your enemy gives up, dies, or forgets why they showed up in the first place. But sieges aren't just about walls, they're about morale, which means keeping everyone alive, fed, and relatively sane, while arrows thunk into the wooden gates and catapults hurl flaming rocks toward your favourite tower. You can't leave. No one can. You're trapped in your glorious stone palace of paranoia with 200 sweaty people, 17 goats, and your mother-in-law, who is already suggesting maybe we should surrender before someone breaks a window. And let's not forget toilets. In a castle under siege, sanitation becomes a high-stakes gamble. Waste disposal involves tossing things from the upper levels and hoping the wind isn't feeling vengeful. Some castles have secret latrines built into the walls, little stone chutes that funnel excrement away from the keep. These are technically known as guardrobes, but unofficially they are called plumbing by gravity and prayer. If you're lucky, there's a cesspit. If you're not, you're living ankle-deep in crisis. Sometimes castles even have secret passages, hidden tunnels used for escape or sneaking in supplies. These are heavily guarded, shrouded in secrecy, and frequently collapsed due to bad engineering or enthusiastic rats. Still, they offer a last-ditch option for survival, or betrayal, or very dramatic monologues in candlelight. All of this, every wall, trap, slit, slope, and stabbing corner, is the result of centuries of escalating paranoia. Castles weren't built for comfort. They were built for siege psychology, to make your enemies feel like they're fighting the building itself, to remind everyone that home is where the boiling pitch is stored and the stairs try to kill you, to say loudly and clearly, you're welcome to visit, but good luck ever leaving. In the end, your castle isn't about peace. It's about controlled chaos. A masterpiece of medieval anxiety made stone. A monument to the fact that everyone, at all times, was expecting to be attacked by a neighbouring baron, a jealous cousin, or that one peasant who never quite forgave the whole land tax thing. So you sleep with a sword under your bed, a bar on your door, and the faint knowledge that your home is ready, for anything, for everything, and for absolutely no one to ever feel comfortable inside it. Because safety in the Middle Ages was just paranoia with better architecture. You're rich, you're powerful, you sleep under a wool blanket that could legally be declared a sibling. And now congratulations, you're sick. Not deathbed sick, just medieval sick. Which, if you're lucky, means you've caught a light cold that will either clear up in a week or turn into a biblical skin affliction and consume your soul by Sunday. But fear not, you're a noble. You have access to elite medieval healthcare. That means incense, prayers, hot compresses made of questionable flowers, and a man with extremely limited medical knowledge about to poke you with a knife carved from sheep bone. It's like modern healthcare, except slower, smokier, and somehow more terrifying. Let's start with the basics. What is medicine, according to a medieval noble? Well, it's equal parts spiritual belief, inherited superstition, trial and error guesswork, and advice from someone who also happens to be your barber. Everything wrong with you, headache, fever, rash, limp, or sense of existential dread, is blamed on one thing: your humours. According to 13th century science, a term we're using with affection and deep suspicion, the body is governed by 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. When these are balanced, you are healthy. When they're not, your options are bleeding, purging, vomiting, or being bled again, just in case you didn't learn your lesson. Because in this era, medical attention just means someone is confidently draining you of life juice in a candlelit room that smells like rosemary and secrets. Enter the physician. Not a surgeon, not a healer, not someone who's ever washed their hands. A physician is a university-trained man who has read a lot of Latin, owns a copy of Galen's medical texts, and will take one look at your tongue before declaring you to be suffering from melancholy of the spleen. He will never touch you. Physical exams are for peasants and sinners. But he will sniff your urine, squint thoughtfully at your pulse, and recommend you drink boiled fennel in wine while listening to monks chant. If that doesn't work, you'll need to be bled until your soul gets the hint. But maybe your illness requires real action. Maybe you have boils, or swelling, or something that looks like it's growing a second, angrier face on your back. Time for a barber surgeon. Yes, the man who trims your beard is also the man who will cut open your abscess with a knife he just used on a boar carcass. He does not own a sterilized anything. He does, however, have a bucket, a leather strap to bite, and a generally positive attitude about things that really shouldn't be opened. Your treatment begins with a strong prayer, a stronger drink, and an even stronger servant to hold you down. There is no anesthesia. There is no antiseptic. There is only trust. And leeches. Oh yes, leeches. Small, slimy, enthusiastic little vampires, harvested from swamps and lovingly applied to your skin by someone claiming to be a specialist. Why? Because you have too much blood. That's the problem. Not the infected wound, not the pus, not the screaming. You're simply too full of vital force, and the only solution is to have a blood-sucking worm extract it while everyone watches and reassures you this is definitely what nobles do. And if you're not bleeding, you're purging. Laxatives are made from herbs, ashes, and whatever the cook had too much of. You drink them and hope that your bowels cleanse your soul before you lose the will to live. Vomiting is also encouraged. Not naturally, of course, medically. Emetic potions are made from ingredients like mustard, wormwood, and regret, administered by someone holding a bucket and whispering, "You're doing amazing, my lord." But noble medicine isn't all excretions. Sometimes it's chic. The higher your rank, the more elaborate your remedies. Gold leaf in wine, powdered pearls, ground-up gemstones mixed into honey. Does it help? No. But it's expensive, and therefore it must be doing something. Your physician tells you the sapphire dust will align your internal balance. You nod, grateful, while coughing up something that looks like future plague. Also, let's not forget herbal treatments. Your garden isn't just for aesthetics. It's a pharmacy. Chamomile for fever, sage for wounds, lavender for anxiety, mandrake for nightmares, henbane for those inconvenient family members who keep recovering. Your chamber is filled with sachets of dried herbs, tied with ribbon and optimism. You sleep beside a sprig of rosemary and a pouch of crushed basil, hoping it protects you from both illness and Gerald's night breath. And should you fall gravely ill, fevered, hallucinating, unable to sit up, you'll receive special care. Your bed will be surrounded by candles. A priest will be summoned. You'll be anointed with oil. The servants will whisper outside your chamber, and your physician will declare solemnly that your liver has declared war on your gallbladder. You might be bled again, just in case. You might receive holy water boiled with rose petals and regret. But ultimately, everyone is preparing for the moment when you either die or, miraculously, wake up just in time to hear the will being read. And if, by some miracle, you recover, the physician will take full credit, the leeches will be praised, the wine will be blessed, and the disease? It will be declared a trial sent by God to test your moral fortitude. You passed, apparently. You also now have a permanent limp and night terrors, but hey, you survived. If you're a woman, your medical care is worse, much worse. Your uterus is blamed for everything. Headache, womb wandering, stomach pain, womb is angry. Depression, your womb read too much poetry. Treatments include baths, barely warm, fumigation, yes, down there, and being told to just get married already. Childbirth, that's a separate category of horror. Midwives, herbs, screaming, and a 50% chance you meet God before the midwife meets the afterbirth. Nobility does not protect you from this. It just gives you fancier pillows to scream into. And then there's the spiritual side of medicine. Illness might be caused by sin, or demons, or standing too close to a morally questionable chicken. So you'll confess, you'll fast, you'll visit a saint's shrine and drink from a holy spring. You might even acquire a relic, a splinter of a saint's femur, a drop of sacred oil, or a toe bone kept in a jewelled box and waved dramatically over your chest. If it works, praise be. If it doesn't, you weren't holy enough. Or maybe you forgot to tithe. All of this, every leech, every herbal infusion, every bloodletting, every whispered prayer, is medieval noble medicine. And yes, it's better than peasant medicine. Slightly. You get more herbs, more candles, and your leeches probably come from a higher-end swamp, but the outcome is often the same. Either you recover, or you don't. Either way, you're going to be bled about it. So the next time you clutch your side, feel a fever coming on, or notice your urine is a troubling shade of purple, just remember, your physician has a theory, your barber has a blade, your cook has some herbs, and your priest has already prepared the candles. You're in the best hands the 1300s can offer. May God help you. Because medicine definitely won't. Congratulations, you're engaged. Or rather, you have been engaged on your behalf, sometime between your birth and your first acne outbreak. You are now part of that beautiful, time-honoured institution known as medieval noble marriage, where emotions are irrelevant, attraction is inconvenient, and compatibility is measured in acres and goat taxes. Because make no mistake, you do not marry for love. You marry for land, alliance, title, teeth, if available, and the promise that your future children will own more sheep than emotional intimacy. Your family has selected your spouse with the same care they'd use when choosing a decorative side table, attractive, sturdy, and unlikely to embarrass the room in front of guests. Love? That's for peasants and poets. You're here to forge dynasties, to merge estates and produce heirs, ideally male ones. If love happens to occur after marriage, that's nice. If not, you'll learn to tolerate each other in the same way you tolerate boiled turnips, quietly, bitterly, and with frequent belching. Let's talk about the wedding. It's a glorious event. Robes, rings, religious rituals performed in Latin you don't understand. You're likely between the ages of 12 and 18, though some unions happen earlier. Because what's more romantic than binding yourself to a complete stranger before you've finished growing your second molars? The ceremony involves vows, blessings, and often an exchange of livestock. There's a priest, a feast, and a crowd of relatives, pretending they're not already calculating how much more valuable the family is now that you've married into those nice vineyards near Normandy. The whole thing takes less than an hour. The consequences last forever. Now for the honeymoon, which is just the part of the evening where you're shoved into a chamber and strongly encouraged to consummate the alliance while a servant waits outside to make sure the bedsheets can be legally submitted as evidence. Because in the Middle Ages, the wedding isn't valid until it's been witnessed, sometimes by God, sometimes by your mother-in-law lurking nearby with her ear to the door. So, how is medieval noble sex? In a word, obligatory. You do it because you must. Because your family expects heirs. Because your lineage needs more tiny lords in training. Because if you don't produce a son within a year, the church will begin looking at you like you've personally offended St. Augustine. Pleasure? Nice if it happens. Communication? Unlikely. Consent? Let's just say it's not part of the vow package. Affairs, meanwhile, are extremely common, especially among men. If you're a nobleman, it's almost expected that you'll keep a mistress, or 3, a servant, a laundress, a visiting noble's bored daughter, or someone who happened to walk past your hunting lodge with good hair. Discretion is recommended, but rarely practiced. Everyone knows, no one cares. Unless your mistress becomes politically inconvenient, or insists on wearing jewellery above her station. For noble women, affairs are trickier. If you're discreet, clever, and have a husband too busy managing wars or his ulcer to notice, you might get away with it. Just don't get pregnant. Or court. Or write love poems. Or smile too brightly at that one night everyone's whispering about. Because while men's affairs are shrugged off, a woman's indiscretion can land her in a convent, a tower, or a shallow grave with a lovely headstone. And what of women in marriage? Welcome to being a walking dowry. You are a uterus with handwriting. Your value is calculated by the land, money, and political alliances you bring with you. Your job is to be pretty enough to parade around court, obedient enough to not frighten your husband, and fertile enough to produce children until someone politely dies. Your daily routine, embroidery, childbirth, praying, managing the household, bleeding out quietly once a month while pretending everything smells like rosewater and not despair. Your opinions are appreciated as long as they align with your husband's. Your education? Limited to whatever makes you more decorative and less argumentative. Reading is acceptable. Reading too much? Suspicious. But don't worry, there are perks. If you're a high-born lady, you'll have gowns, jewellery, your own chamber, sometimes, and maybe even a falcon to whisper your secrets to. You'll host feasts, smile at tournaments, and quietly resent the other wives who married better. You'll age quickly, thanks to childbirth and the lack of soap, but everyone will pretend not to notice until you die, or become the widowed aunt who talks to shadows. Speaking of children, they are not the soft-cheeked cherubs from fairy tales. They are responsibilities in training, little contracts with legs. Sons are precious, praised, and raised to inherit everything. Daughters are negotiation tools, betrothed by the age of 7, and taught to be quiet, appealing, and strategic. If they're lucky, they'll marry someone slightly less than twice their age. If not, they'll be shipped to a convent to pray about it. And let's not forget the church's involvement. Everything you do, every kiss, touch, or suspicious glance, is being watched by an invisible network of monks, nuns, and confessors, ready to explain that you are, in fact, sinning terribly by existing in a vaguely passionate way. Sex is for procreation, not recreation. Fun is dangerous. Lust is deadly. Kissing with feeling, straight to hell. Unless you're married, in which case, also hell, but slower. If things go badly, your spouse dies, cheats, or becomes impossible to live with, you have options. Very few, very terrible options. Divorce is rare, scandalous, and requires the approval of several bishops, 2 popes, and a signed note from St. Peter himself. More likely you'll separate quietly. He'll live in the West Wing, you'll live in the East. You'll communicate via increasingly petty household servants until one of you falls off a horse or is poisoned with an overspiced meat pie. And through it all, you smile. You host dinners. You bless the union of your children's strategic marriages. You attend mass with your spouse and pretend you don't both despise each other's breathing patterns. You become, over time, political furniture. Respected, rarely moved, often overlooked, and occasionally polished when guests arrive. This is noble marriage, not romance, not intimacy. It's a contract with upholstery, dressed in silk and expectations, maintained through duty, appearance, and mutual toleration. If love grows, good for you. If not, you're still legally required to attend dinners and produce viable offspring. Because in the Middle Ages, marriage is not the beginning of love, it's the beginning of mutual survival. If you are a noble living in a medieval castle, and you've somehow made it to the age of 50, congratulations. You are officially ancient, a walking miracle, a relic with opinions. People start referring to you in hushed tones, not because they respect your wisdom, but because they're not entirely sure you're still alive, or just really still. Old age in a castle is not graceful. There are no rocking chairs, no quiet sunsets, no nostalgic walks through the orchard. There's just joint pain, chronic cold, and servants aggressively pretending not to notice when you fall asleep mid-sentence. Your hair is grey if you're lucky, missing if you're not. Your teeth are gone or wobbly. You eat gruel voluntarily now, not because you like it, but because everything else feels like chewing gravel wrapped in betrayal. And your bones, brittle. Your back, bent like the family finances after a failed crusade. You wheeze your way through the great hall, coughing at candles, blessing grandchildren who don't know your name, and periodically losing track of what day it is. But you're still the lord or lady of the castle. You still get the best chair by the fire, even if you have to fight Gerald for it. Again, if you're male, you might still be ruling. a generous word for issuing vaguely coherent commands from bed while servants run the estate, and everyone politely ignores the fact that you've confused your steward with your long-dead brother. If you're female, you've either been retired to the solar or transformed into the dowager matriarch, a figure both revered and feared, known for embroidery, cryptic statements, and terrifying commentary on the fertility of younger women. And then, of course, comes the inevitable. You fall ill, or you trip on a stair you helped build, or you simply slump in your carved wooden chair one afternoon and never unslump. Death arrives quietly in the end. No fireworks, just a final wheeze, a last sigh, and maybe a whispered insult aimed at your second son, who never really got the hang of jousting. The moment you die, your castle goes into panic mode. Bells are rung, curtains are drawn, servants start sobbing theatrically, and then immediately begin fighting over who gets to clean out your room. Your body is washed, badly, dressed in something regal, and laid out like a medieval mannequin, hands folded, expression vaguely judgmental. The priest arrives to anoint your corpse, mumble holy things, and pretend you were a deeply pious soul who didn't once try to seduce a travelling lute player in your 40s. Your heirs begin squabbling before the funeral is finished. Your spouse weeps loudly, unless they've already moved their things to the guest room and started courting your cousin. Your burial is based entirely on your social rank and how many enemies you outlived. If you were especially noble, you get a stone effigy, a full-body sculpture of your best guess at what you looked like in your 20s, sword in hand, cheekbones airbrushed by the mason. You're interred in the family crypt, which is just a fancy way of saying stone basement, with ancestral ghosts and inconsistent airflow. Your final resting place might be in a chapel on the estate, under a slab of marble no one can lift, or in a coffin made from local oak and excessive ceremony. There's no embalming, no real preservation. Just you, some linen, and an army of candles trying to overpower the smell of slow decomposition. Over time, your name fades from memory, but your tomb remains, a nice stone box people occasionally trip over during festivals. If you're less fortunate, say, a minor noble who squandered your wealth on bad hunting dogs and worse poetry, you might be buried in the churchyard with a modest plaque and an incorrect date. If you're a woman, your identity is forever tied to who you married. Your tomb inscription will read something like, "Here lies Lady Eleanor, wife to Lord Robert, mother of 7, survivor of turnip famine." And that's your legacy. And what of your possessions? Your cloak, your goblet, your mysterious dagger collection? It all goes to your heir, unless they don't like you. Then it goes in the fire. Your bed is given to a cousin. Your jewellery is redistributed. Your favourite tapestries are cut into rags. And your chamber pot, yes, the one you used nightly for 20 years, might outlive your memory, because nothing in a castle lasts like the things no one wants to touch. But even in death, your role is not over. You become part of the ancestral legend. Your name is spoken once a year during the harvest feast. Your portrait, painted years after your death by someone guessing, hangs crookedly above the fireplace, and children are told you once wrestled a bear, negotiated peace with the Danes, or survived a 5-day fever after being bled by a man named Hugo the Bold and Reckless. Your castle lives on. The family moves forward. The servants mutter your name when something goes wrong. "That's Lord Edric's ghost," they say when a window won't close, or a pig dies mysteriously. You become part of the law, filed somewhere between St. Cuthbert and the rat infestation of 1312. And here's the brutal truth. History will forget you. Unless you did something outrageous or funded a cathedral, your name will blur into a family tree no one can read. You'll be listed as that one lord who died during winter, or lady something who had all those children. The peasants will remember your taxes. The scribes will remember your handwriting. The rats will remember your pantry. But the castle? The castle remembers everything. Your footsteps on the stone. The worn spot where your chair stood. The faint outline of your shadow in the torchlight. You lived here. You schemed, ruled, ate suspicious stews, screamed at servants, bathed quarterly, and died here. And while no bard may sing your tale, the draught under the West Tower still howls with your name on cold nights, mostly because Gerald insists it's haunted. So live proudly, noble friend, love rarely, wash occasionally, and when your time comes, face it like the lord or lady you are, draped in wool, full of onions, and completely convinced you left your legacy somewhere near the guardrobe. Because in a medieval castle, life is privilege. But death? Death is just part of the draft. And so, noble guest, our castle doors creak closed behind us. We've endured draughty corridors, suspicious stews, emotionally unavailable spouses, and enough lice to qualify as a petting zoo. Life inside these stone walls wasn't a fairy tale. It was survival in velvet sleeves. Thanks for watching. If you laughed, winced, or reconsidered your romanticised castle dreams, then job well done. Leave a comment. Maybe tell us what your noble title would be, or just type, "I bleed like a baron." More medieval misadventures await on the left. May your moat stay full, your chamber pot stay distant, and your bannerman remember your birthday. See you in the next one.